We made it. It's 2024 now, officially. This video was actually supposed to come out a little bit earlier, but I got very sick, and then I had to go home, and just a bunch of stuff, but it ended up being a good thing because I was able to revisit some albums that I had been meaning to revisit, and also check out some albums that I hadn't gotten to in the year. Obviously, there's still going to be some albums that I wish I had more time to check out and get this video out in a reasonable time frame, but I did the best I could. Also, how are we feeling about this? This is kind of a little experiment that I'm growing on my face right now. It looks a little frightening. I might look like Inigo Montoya's awkward nephew. I like to pull on it when I'm, pontificating. Gives my ADD something to mess with. So the video is going to be structured a little bit differently than it was last year. We're going to start with some of the biggest albums that came out this year that I managed to listen to. Then we're going to talk about some albums that I discovered this year that I really loved, but that didn't come out in 2023. And then we're going to do my top list with some honorable mentions of the best albums that came out in 2023, in my opinion. I've noticed that in almost every video that I've done so far, I've said, without further ado, let's get into it. So I'm not going to do that this time. So without further ado, let's get into it. Lil Yachty said, let's start here. So let's start here. It's kind of a mix of psych rock and hip hop. Super interesting. It really came out of nowhere. People were very surprised by this record. I enjoyed it for the most part. I think there are times when his vocal range and his ability to make vocal melodies isn't super strong, and that holds it back from being something that's totally enjoyable to listen to from front to back. But I love a lot of the production ideas. I love a lot of the songs on here, especially like the first couple tracks. His voice is really unique. I really love that aspect to it. It makes it feel like this couldn't have come from a different rapper. And it's just really admirable to see somebody trying something so different and so experimental. It wasn't one of my favorites of the year, but I think it was one of the most surprising albums of the year, and I certainly enjoyed it for that. Next, I want to talk about Olivia Rodrigo's album Guts. I want to preface this by saying this is probably my favorite mainstream release of the year, at least in pop music. I really enjoyed it overall, especially the banger songs. Ballad of a Homeschool Girl. Yeah, I really love that song. I love a lot of the pop punk stuff because I think her vocals work really well for it, and also she's able to construct the songs in a way they sound very clean but also very full. They sound fresh for pop punk. That being said, I think the reason I don't like this album as much as I want to is I think the songwriting is a bit limited, not just in terms of her subject matter, because she does tend to retread a lot of the same stuff, but also just in terms of her lyrical style. She is a very direct songwriter, and it's cool for a bit, but as the album goes on, and especially for the slower songs, I think the lack of variety in her songwriting and the lack of depth hurts my enjoyment of it. I think if you look at someone like Phoebe Bridgers, where she can write a song that's very slow and doesn't have a lot of variation musically, her lyrics, even if her lyrics aren't super abstract, they have a poetic quality, like a lot of imagery, like in Moon Song, where she says, "You're sick and you're married and you might be dying, but you're holding me like water in your hands." It's such a visual and visceral line that has an emotional weight to it, and I think just some variation of that degree in Olivia Rodrigo's slower songs would help me enjoy them more. This is her second album, and she's so good. That's my thoughts on Guts by Olivia Rodrigo. Then we got Travis Scott's album Utopia. This was another kind of surprising album in terms of the direction that he went with the production, and I really enjoyed it the first time I listened to it. Obviously, I had thoughts of oh, this sounds like Yeezus, but that's okay. I think it works with Travis's darker trap aesthetic. The problem is, and this is not an original opinion at all, a lot of people shared the same sentiment, but the Travis Scott is just not as compelling of a frontman. I think a lot of the features outshine him on the project, and the production definitely outshines him. I just think his lyrics are kind of weak, his vocal presence. Sometimes it's really cool, and sometimes it just fades into the background. I think the first half of the album is stronger than the second half. I think the more and more I kept listening to it, the Yeezus similarities became unavoidable. Still really cool for Travis to hear him on this type of production, and I think it works for his style overall. It's just not one of my favorites of the year. Drake released an album this year. So that's going to do it for the big albums that I got to. So let's move into some albums I found for the first time in 2023, but came out before 2023. Starting with the album that I listened to more than any other album this year. Hypochondriac. Yes, I discovered Breakince's Hypochondriac. This album was just undeniably on repeat for me. According to my Apple Music replay, I listened to Breakince's album Hypochondriac 397 times, which sounds insane. And it's even more insane considering I discovered this album halfway through the year. It just hits for me. It's a very ADD-friendly pop album. The production is insanely impressive. The singing I love. And he talks about the contrast between his ego and his insecurity. Please listen to this album if you haven't yet. It totally would have made it on my list last year if I had heard it. Alright, then I want to talk about Speak For Yourself by Imogen Heap. Yes, this is my first time listening to Imogen Heap. This was the most instant 10 out of 10 album I've had in a while. I was just in the car blasting it. From the very first track, I was blown away by the vocals, by the production especially, how it was able to keep my interest. And I was also just so taken aback by how Caroline Polachek this is. Like, if you're a Caroline Polachek fan, this is the blueprint. And those are all the albums I wanted to talk about that came before 2023. So now let's get into some honorable mentions for my favorite albums of 2023. The Lamb as Effigy by Sprain. This was the most disturbing and scary album I listened to all year. There are parts where noise just comes out and assaults your ears like a jump scare. If you like the feeling of watching like Hereditary, then I think you'll like this album. It has kind of Colin Stetson vibes, the guy that made the music for Hereditary. Some huge Swans influence. There's a song in the middle that's like 25 minutes long, and it is so much like a Swan song, it's practically identity theft. Yeah, Sprain, The Lamb as Effigy, it's scary, it's kind of horrible, but it's a good time. Then I think maybe the most underrated album of the year is Failed at Maths by Panchico. This almost made my actual list, but it's just super short. It's like 26 minutes, and it's just a nice, well-produced electronic album. The sounds were really soothing. This is like a really nice lay in bed and listen to it. Then I want to talk about two albums really quickly that almost made the list. One of them is My Name Is by What Is Your Name. This is like an emo soft rock album. If you like people like American Football or Alex G, I think you'd really like this record. And the other one that is so close to making my list was Lahai by Sampha. The only reason I think this isn't making the list is because I haven't had as much time to listen to it as I have with the albums that are on my list. This album, like, you put it on and you kind of just float, you know? So gotta shout out those albums. And now, without further ado, here's my favorite albums of 2023 list. I'm gonna do 15 albums. I know it's a little excessive, but there were so many great albums that came out this year that I felt weird excluding some of the ones that I really liked. Starting with number 15. Rod girl, whiskey's gonna ease my mind. Yeah, it surprised me that I listened to this album as much as I did. It's just such a nice, refreshing album for country music. Zach Bryan is definitely inspired by Jason Isbell, and it's pretty obvious. There are definitely worse country artists to be inspired by, especially in this day and age, and Jason Isbell is one of my favorite modern country artists. And I think he adds a lot of his own personal stories and his own personal experiences. Obviously, the big song that came from this was the song that he did with Casey Musgraves called I Remember Everything. Love that song. And this just feels like a very organic album, which is just refreshing for popular country music. The vocals aren't very touched up at all. I guess for my own personal taste, I want something more like this Zach Bryan album than I do something like Last night we let the liquor talk. You know everybody sings, I apologize. Why you gotta act, gotta dramatize. I prefer to be alone, that's a lot of times. I was mature for my age, but I was still a child by Group Therapy. This is one of my favorite rap albums of the year. Group Therapy is a rap trio that I've never heard of before. I've heard some comparisons to Brockhampton, and I think that's pretty valid. The vocals, like the actual singing vocals, are really nice. And I love the balance between more intense rapping and more personal stories. Whatever mood you're looking for, this album has it. I think the only drawbacks to it are some of the lines are a bit cheesy, and I think some of the songs in the middle of the track list fall into the background for me. It doesn't really keep my attention all the way. Still, a really fantastic rap album this year. If you missed it, you should go and listen to it. Holy shit, this album cover lives in my nightmares, but it's genuinely one of my favorite albums of the year, and I was gonna leave it off the list until I revisited it recently, and I was like, no, this is amazing. Technically a sequel to their album Null, which I haven't listened to, but I'm excited to listen to it because this album is so explosive. It's very short too, so it's pretty digestible for the kind of music it is. It's pretty brutal, it's intense, it's metal music, it's just screaming vocals. It has a lot of surprising diversity. These Wires, one of the best songs of the year. It's so good. It's almost like post-punk. There's like noise elements to it. And then you'll look at something like the last track on the album, like bass and less shouty vocals. This album just kind of gets in and gets out. This is like a fun gym album for like Holden Caulfield. But I'm so I'm such a big fan of Caroline Polachek. Overall, I really enjoy this record, but there are some tracks here and there that I'm just not that into or don't do anything for me. The songs that work on here are so massive feeling. Her vocals are amazing as always. And her Tiny Desk performance, I'm like, I don't even know how a person can, it sounds like she has auto-tune on her just natural singing voice. Like, it's crazy. Like I said, a lot of inspiration from Imogen Heap. I think this album, she goes into her own lane even more, and I really admire the weirdness of some of the songs on this project. Most of you have probably heard of this album by now, but if you haven't, you should definitely check it out. One of my favorite pop albums of the year. Next, I got Scaring the Hose by Danny Brown and JPEG Mafia. A huge event of an album. If you're a fan of JPEG's and Danny's individually, then you know how big of a deal this is. I was very excited for this record. Before I get into what I love about it, because there's just so much love about it, I just want to get some negatives out of the way. The most obvious one being, I think Danny Brown's voice is mixed just too low, and people have pointed this out since the album came out, but it does affect my enjoyment of the album. Like, there's just parts where I cannot hear what he's saying, and because JPEG is such a shouty rapper and he comes out so clean on his own production, I think Danny Brown's presence throughout the record falls to the wayside a little bit. There are some tracks where that's not the case, and those are some of my favorite tracks, but especially in the first few songs, it really feels like a JPEG Mafia album featuring Danny Brown, unfortunately, instead of this like amazing collab album. That being said, this is some of the most creative production I've heard in a rap album. This is some of JPEG's weirdest stuff that I think he's done so far. Hilarious samples, hilarious moments throughout. It's playing into the thing of being alienating on purpose. But yeah, love this thing. It's so creative, it's so explosive. I can totally see why it would be somebody's favorite album of the year. Up next, we got The Worm by HMLTD. HMLTD is a British post-punk band that came out from the same scene that Black Midi and Black Country New Road came from. Their previous album, West of Eden, I think is a pretty underrated post-punk album these days. When it came out, I think it was really well received, but nobody really talks about it anymore. And then this album is this concept album about a worm that attacks England. Think of like Alaskan bullworm from SpongeBob vibes. And I just love the dynamic sounds on this album. It goes from post-punk to like straight up like Coldplay-esque pop music to ballads. There's songs that straight up sound like they're out of an Andrew Lloyd Webber musical. It definitely doesn't appeal to everybody, but it appealed to me. Only real negatives I have with this album, I think it doesn't sound as big as it wants to at some points. That might be a budgetary problem. I still think there are parts where it does sound really grand, but it was lacking a little bit of something to keep it from feeling more of a small scale project. And I think some of the vocals have moments that are a bit questionable. I really love the commitment to the themes and the ideas of the songs and just the goofiness and theatricality of it. So tell me, what did I do to deserve you? Kidding me this way? This album surprised me so much. Every song is just a banger, banger. I especially love the songs Mosquito. I like Ophelia. Ophelia is probably my favorite on the record. Capable of Love. I also love the opener, Another Life. The only thing I don't like about this record are some of the features are just like genuinely terrible. But also it kind of makes it a little fun. Like when Central C comes on and he's like, I'll risk it for a biscuit. I'm like, that's kind of garbage, but it's kind of addictive too. Like I put that on and I'm like, yeah, my shorty's crying. And there's nothing more iconic than the Ice Spice feature on Boys a Liar Part 2. She kills it. But yeah, if this one fell to the wayside for you and you like pop music, you have to listen to this. It's dancey, it's fun, her vocals are great. Her vocal melody writing I think is really strong too. And I would recommend this album to pretty much anybody. I can't see anybody disliking this. Running from the guns, point and shoot, we used to play upon the playground. My favorite rap album of the year is Beloved Paradise Jazz by McKinley Dixon. This is a very short jazz rap album inspired by the writing of Toni Morrison. He has a great taste for jazz and R&B music that he infuses into this album, and it's such a well-realized little package. I do wish it was a little longer so that I could just expand even more and go even further, but it's a nice little compact jazz rap treat. Super memorable. Jane Remover is most known for her previous record Frailty, which is a hyperpop record. This one is straight up shoegaze and like slowcore, and it is amazing. The layers and the textures of the guitars and the vocals, are just bliss to my ears. The first time I listened to it was the wrong context. I put this on in the car on like a 6-hour road trip, and it was boring me, and I was like, oh no, I don't like this very much. And the next time I listened to it, like a month or two later, I was just in bed and I was staring at the ceiling and I was disassociating. I had like a moving experience with it, and every time since I've revisited this record, it has consistently blown me away. This is such an impressive rock album, and I think it's very underappreciated this year. I think this should be everywhere. I think the lyrics are great too. I like Jane singing on it. Maybe it lacks a bit of like vocal diversity. I don't really care. It's mostly about just the textures. It just takes you to a faraway place, and you just get to live in this like fuzzy, beautiful dreamscape, you know? That was incredibly weird. The Land is Inhospitable and So Are We by Mitski. This record is so good. Some of the best lyricism of the entire year on this record. I mean, I could point out this lyric, or this lyric, or this one, perhaps. Mitski's always been a great lyricist. I just think on this one, the music matches the lyrics so perfectly. Talk about a TikTok hit that actually is a good song with My Love, Mine, All Mine. One of my favorite songs of the entire year. I mean, it is beautiful. Lyrics are great. She's an artist's artist. She just feels like an ethereal spirit that is just put on this planet to make art. Love the opening track. I love the song Heaven. I love I Don't Like My Mind. It is a sad song, but it's beautiful. Another short album by Mitski, so it's not a demanding listen at all. Go listen to it. You have no excuse not to.
I know you want me freak, sports star honeybee on my team.
Up next, we have my third most listened to album of the year, according to Apple Music Replay. I've listened to this 192 times. Feeble Little Horse with Girl with Fish. Another just like banger fest from start to finish. This record is like if you took My Bloody Valentine and Kimya Dawson and just squished them together. This is like what the people who listened to the Juno soundtrack grew up and started to listen to. The vocals are very like deadpan. Maybe for a more modern comparison, it would be something like Blue Rev by Always, which came out last year. Noisy and fuzzy guitar tones throughout the record and really memorable guitar lines. I really love the opening track, Freak. I just found this album on my Apple Music and clicked on it because I liked the cover and I liked the name, and it is just sweet, it's sticky, it's addictive, it's memorable, it's punchy, it's fun, it's short, you gotta listen to it.
So you are tired of
This is the hardest album to listen to of the entire year for me, just in terms of the content. It's incredibly sad. If you don't know the backstory of this record, look into it if you want. It's a little bit upsetting to bring up here. It is just a gorgeous album trying to make sense of relationships, trying to make sense of things ending, of dying. Oh man, such a passionate, soothing record. And just some of Sufjan's most broken sounding vocals when he's singing like, hold me closely, hold me tightly, lest I fall. Dude, that line alone can break anybody. Him repeating that over and over again, getting more passionate throughout the song. He's one of the best songwriters we have today, and this album is just such a generous album in terms of his vulnerability and what he lets us as an audience into. Now for something a little more upbeat, we have 3D Country by Geese. This is such an awesome record. Man, this was another one that was on repeat throughout the year constantly. Harkens back to some blues music. The opening song, 2122, is like a post-punk but also dad rock collage. The lead singer is a superstar. He can do everything. He's got these insane highs, this weird kind of low, almost country drawl. Almost like if you smushed Jeff Buckley and Tim Buckley together as an artist, that would be the lead singer of Geese. An infectious, wall-to-wall banger album. I wish I could talk about it more, but my camera is going to die.
Honestly, I've never reached this point before. I can't live through another.
Yeah, okay, listen. Live at Bush Hall from Black Country New Road. Black Country New Road, like I've mentioned before, dropped my favorite record of last year and my favorite record of the previous year. And they come through with my second favorite record of this year. And it's not even really a record, it's a live album. But it's all new material, so I feel justified in putting it. It's material that you haven't heard on any previous record, that's only made and will only exist in this context. And it's really good, even without Isaac, who is just such an essential part of the band, for myself personally, and I'm sure for many others as well. But they're still able to come up with these beautiful tracks in such a short period of time. It's incredibly impressive. Tyler Hyde's voice is gorgeous. The songwriting from each of the individual members who sing on this record is so different. It provides so many different perspectives from the band that you really get a nice range of what kind of music the band is into as each individual member, but then also how they can expand those styles into the Black Country New Road genre, basically. Really cool, really looking forward to what they have next. Obviously, they're like my favorite band. I'm literally wearing their shirt right now. I've seen them live twice now, and they just kill it every time. Very much looking forward to an actual new release from this band that's not just a live record, but I was addicted to it. It's beautiful. Give it a listen. And my number one record of the year is Wall Socket by Underscores. I have been dying to talk about this record. I have annoyed everybody that I know about this record. I think it is the most creative, the most impressive, impactful, dancey record of the entire year, of the entire last 5 years. It's a genre-defying masterpiece of an album. It would be impressive if it was a band, but this is just one person making all of this music. Every individual song is great. The sequencing is awesome. It's the perfect length. This is a concept album about the town of Wallsocket, Michigan, centering around 3 characters. But even if you don't know the lore and the backstory of this album, it just works as individual tracks as well. I think it has some of the most underrated lyrics of the entire year, and some of my favorite lyrics of the year. In 77 Dog Years, where a character is talking to her father and she's saying, "Have you noticed that your hounds have grown so old since I learned what you did?" You have the line in "You Don't Even Know Who I Am," where it's someone who's stalking somebody that they're obsessed with. Towards the end of the song they say, "I invite myself in and wore your clothes, took your pills, cried your makeup off, and for once I felt just like you." This album has everything from pop punk to hyper pop, ballads, to basically like rave music, and all the features are awesome. I love every single feature on this record, every single song I love. The only song I don't really care for is the closer, just because it's not as sonically interesting as some of the other tracks, but it works thematically, and I like that it's the 12th track on the record, because there's a theme throughout the record about the number 11 and the number 7 and the idea of good luck, and the album covers a giant horseshoe, and it just kind of reminds me of, like, in a series of unfortunate events, how there are 13 books. Each book has 13 chapters, which is like, the unlucky number, but then in the final book there's a 14th chapter, and it's about how like the kids have sort of gotten out of their unfortunate lives. So this album having 12 tracks, and the final track being Good Luck Final Girl, and it's kind of about how each character is trying to improve their lives. I think it's thematically important, and I'm glad it's there. I think it's just not as strong sonically as some of the other songs on here, but other than that, you need to listen to this album. It is unreal. It's unreal. If I haven't sold you on it, I don't know what I need to quit YouTube. Listen to it, please. Just listen to it. And that's gonna do it. We did it. Camera didn't die. We made it out alive. So I gotta get out of here before that happens. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. The next video I have coming up is my every book that I read in 2023 video. I will do the outro now.